Good morning, friends, and welcome to our annual Friday morning discussion groups. And we have an interesting talk by David Saunders today entitled, "Do you want to live forever?"
And I apologize for the whimsical title. Patty was calling for contributions, and I came up with a sort of silly title for the energy talk a couple of weeks ago, which was, would you like cheaper energy? And I sort of had this idea of a talk about consciousness, really. And I thought, can I think of a silly title for it? And would you like to live forever? I'm a little bit conscious that since we're making these talks findable, and funny titles do work. That talk that I gave a couple of weeks ago, "Do you want cheaper energy?" has a record of 76 views now, whereas Charles's wonderful talk on energy has totted up 37 views, and Jenny's up to 25. So making them public does mean they get seen more, but we're not viral sensations quite yet. But I'm conscious that people can find these things, and "Do you want to live forever?" may be seen by people who are actually worried about dying or have some fears and things like that. And I want to be respectful of that, whilst my talk is really, if you do want to live forever, then it should be in parentheses, in this current body, tough, because it's going to decay. But I want to go into what's deeper than that, and some of the things that I discovered during lockdown. So in the last couple of years, I found out some interesting things, having thought that I want to do that. But so Quakers are, we love to quote from Faith and Practice and, the Book of Questions and Answers, so that the collected wisdom of Quakers is very important to us. And funnily enough, I found a Quaker group of afterlife studies, Quakers who are interested in evidence of life after death. And I have done the decent thing, which is not to research that deeply, because probably anything that I would say would be counted by them as blasphemous. So I thought better to come from knowing nothing. But I've also found some other Quaker groups with some really nice talks about death and dying, people in hospices, and so on. So there is a lot of information out there, and Quakers are particularly good on care of people who are coming close to dying. And none of us are getting any younger, so maybe that becomes relevant at some point. But what I wanted to start with is from another tradition. And this is, so, we have Quaker material going back hundreds of years. The Indians have material going back thousands of years. And there's a wonderful piece right at the core of the Indian system. They have two great epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is the more recent of the two. It's sort of like our Odyssey and Iliad. And the Mahabharata is the story of an epic war building up and being fought between two clans. They're actually cousins, 5 brothers against 100 of their cousins. And the war is very evenly matched, and it wipes out pretty much the entire warrior caste of India, perhaps 5,000 years ago, maybe less. And right at the heart of the Mahabharata is a whole book called the Bhagavad Gita, which is the Lord's Song, is what it means. And this is the warrior, Arjuna, is right at the start. The battle is about to start, and Arjuna is looking out at the array massed against them of cousins and family. And he says, and his charioteer is Krishna, an avatar of the god Vishnu. And Arjuna looks at what's about to happen and says, this can't be right. I can't fight. My bow slips from my hand. What am I going to do? And he says, I rest in you. You know, I don't know what to do. Tell me what I should do. And he's saying, you know, all this killing can't be right. And so Krishna comes out with this speech. It's a whole book, the Bhagavad Gita. And I just want to read a little bit about it, about death and dying, because as I read it, think about how 5,000 years of Indians have heard this and seen it performed, and why it's more or less inevitable that in India there's a massive belief in reincarnation in one form or another. So Krishna speaks. The blessed Lord said to Arjuna, you grieve for those for whom there should be no grief. Yet speakers do the wise. Wise men grieve neither for the dead nor for the living. There never was a time when I was not, nor you, nor these rulers of men, nor will there ever be a time when all of us shall cease to be. As the dweller in this body passes into childhood, youth, and age, so also does he pass into another body. This does not bewilder the wise. Contacts of the senses with their objects, O son of Kunti, gives rise to the experience of cold and heat, pleasure and pain. Transient, they come and go. Bear them patiently, O Bharata. So he's calling him by affectionate names that remind him of his stature and lineage. That man indeed, whom these contacts do not disturb, who is even-minded in pleasure and pain, steadfast, he is fit for immortality, O best of men. The unreal has no being. The real never ceases to be. The final truth of them both has been perceived by the seers of ultimate reality. Know that to be indeed indestructible, by which all this is pervaded. None can work the destruction of this immutable being. These bodies are known to have an end. The dweller in the body is internal, imperishable, infinite. Therefore, O Bharata, fight, right? So, and it goes on like this, and explains that there's aspects to the body that can't be cut, burned, frozen, and cannot perish. So he's distinguishing between our physical body and something deeper that is eternal. And I actually, as a fairly new meditator, I read some of that out at my mother's funeral, because the prerogative of the eldest son, I was sort of indulged in that. But I found it very moving when I started to learn about an Indian philosophy that ran counter to not perhaps what we learn in our religions, but certainly to our materialist philosophy. And so I've got loads of notes, and I was trusting that I would kind of pick on some of the themes that are appropriate. There's no way I can get through everything I've written here, but the thing that is central to me, and that I was thinking of when I was talking to Patty, is what I have learned in the last couple of years about new advances in science that might help explain death and near-death experiences. Now, if you look in the right places on YouTube or books as well, there are loads and loads and loads of people who write about near-death experiences. You know, they've been on a hospital table, they've floated up, they've seen something, they've had an experience of something very different to our normal reality, kind of a celestial or heavenly experience. And people have poo-pooed that as what happens to the body, you know, the brain when it's deprived of oxygen or whatever. But others have gone into this in great depth, including physicians. So I've got a lovely book here called After, written by Dr. Bruce Grayson. A doctor explores what near-death experiences reveal about life and beyond. More recently, an American researcher, his name momentarily escapes me, I've got it written down somewhere, but this American researcher, Robert Bigelow, his wife died, and he held a competition for essays about evidence of life after death. And he had over 300 entries, many of which were incredibly well researched and very deep. So it's like a whole library of studies of one sort or another, many of which focus on near-death experiences. And one of the winners is a friend of mine who's an aerospace researcher called Nick Cook. And he was with his wife when his wife's mother died. And there was a peaceful feeling in the room. And everybody was sort of quiet and respectful. And then his wife, Ali, said, "Well, everything's all right then." And they sort of looked at her. And she looked back at them and said, "Didn't you experience that?" And they said, "What?" And she had basically gone off with her mother. You know, she had had what is now called a shared death experience with her mother. And she had kind of floated off with her mother into some kind of celestial or heavenly space. And she realized that everything really was all right. And she came back and said that, but nobody else in the room had had that experience. It had just been her and her mum. But of course, Nick's her husband. They'd been married for years. And there was no question in his mind that what Ali had just experienced wasn't completely real. You don't not trust your spouse in things like that. Whatever your spouse experiences is as real for you as it is for them. So Nick wrote about this as with near-death experiences and so on. And I've read some of these essays, and especially Nick's, and find them incredibly moving and interesting. But I have a deeper question. And the deeper question is, how does it happen? There has to be some kind of mechanics that makes this possible. What is this space that people float off into? If there is some kind of heaven, what's it made of? All that kind of thing. You know, I can't help it. I'm just nerdy. You know, if somebody says something has happened, fine. But how did it happen? You know, how did Jesus walk on water? You know, what was the trick with the loaves and the fishes? You know, how did he turn the water into wine? I mean, how do miracles work? Are they just some kind of higher science that we're not open to just yet? And particularly, how does living after death work? It seems to me that the image that I have is of throwing a skimmer across a lake, right? And it's sort of skipping on the lake surface. And I'm imagining it's sort of dipping below and coming up, and it's sort of dipping below into something more cosmic and then coming up onto the surface again in a human body. But, you know, how does that happen? How does it work? By the way, if at any point I say something completely insane or you've got a question, just come out with it. And I'll either do what I can to answer it right away or put it on a pile to come round to. So there you go. That's what at the start of lockdown, I just thought, well, we're going to be spending some time not seeing each other. I'd like to learn something new. I'd like to learn some deeper truths. I'd like to find some higher wisdom as a result of all this. And one book that was published during the time was written by the Lebanese physiologist, doctor, who became the successor to Maharishi Maesh Yogi in the Transcendental Meditation movement. After Maharishi died, he left it in the capable hands of Dr. Tony Nader. And Tony Nader has written a book called One Unbounded Ocean of Consciousness. And the book is simply an expansion on that phrase. He's saying that all of existence, everything that there is one unbounded ocean of consciousness, and that all matter, everything that we experience, our identity, and so on, is an expression of that unbounded ocean of consciousness. As opposed to the scientific view, which is that we're in some kind of material universe, and that consciousness, our consciousness, is something that somehow emerges from the functioning of the brain. So there's a war going on in science at the moment. Some people won't acknowledge it because they're sufficiently fixed in their view that they think that the other side is irrelevant and wrong and not worthy of consideration. But scientists who study consciousness sort of say that there are a couple of hard problems. And the hard problem of consciousness is finding out where the seat of consciousness is in the brain and how it works. And I was going to leave this one out, but I will say it. David Icke, who is known for his unusual views, has one saying which I really do like, and it is this. He says, looking for consciousness in the brain is like looking inside a radio for the announcer. And so he's saying that the brain is something that taps into consciousness, but it doesn't create it, right? And if you start to look into that, there are scientists now who are saying, you know, actually our four-dimensional reality is quite limited. You know, reality isn't real. Einstein once said, reality is an illusion, and he said, albeit a very persistent one. And there are scientists now who are looking into how it is that we experience reality and saying that our brain, of course, we don't see atoms. We somehow construct a view of the world through our senses, and it allows us to navigate the world, survive and all that. But there are scientists who are now saying that we're looking at the world through a filter, and we construct a view of the world that's very limited. And I want to understand this in more depth. And through the years, having had some contact with the Indian Vedic wisdom system, I've had some exposure, you know, being able to get some ideas. What I heard in the, sorry, I'm just conscious that I haven't got a clock running in front of me. Where are we on time at the moment? Can somebody?
It's 11:30, David.
Okay, great. So I will rattle on for 10 minutes and then we can discuss. The thing that I want to introduce is what I heard from a physicist called John Hagelin. And I'll put a link to a video of him doing a presentation on this in the notes that will come under the recording. You click more underneath, and there'll be a link to this talk. And he is a unified field theorist who, one of his theories was a model of how the universe is created. And it's a multidimensional universe, and the model allows for the creation of dark matter. Now, dark matter is something that it's only emerged in our physics in the last couple of decades. And it's come up because once you realize, when you look out there and you see stars at night, you think, wow, that's wonderful. They're all round like our sun. And then after a while, you discover, oh my goodness, as the telescopes get better, you see that some of them aren't stars, they're collections of stars, galaxies. And you can look at the galaxies and you start doing arithmetic with them. And at some point you say, hang on a tick, these galaxies are rotating too quickly. At the speed that I calculate that they're rotating, the stars should be flying off the ends of their spiral arms and out into space. You know, like whirling something, you know, the gravitational attraction at the center of the galaxy isn't strong enough to hold the stars in. Now, what are we going to do about that? So scientists invented dark matter, which is a sort of fudge factor to create a load more gravity to hold galaxies together. And then they said, wait a minute, if the galaxies all weigh so much more, and it's like 10 times more, then there's much more mass in the universe, and all the galaxies should be attracting each other and falling together because of this extra weight. So they then had to invent another fudge factor called dark energy, which is pushing them apart. So we've got this really quite bizarre universe where we realize that what's visible is only a fraction of what we're seeing. And we're not really able to detect it. We can detect it via what's called gravitational lensing, but we can't see that matter, and it doesn't interact with our ordinary matter. Well, John Hagelin done some extra work on this, right? And some people who he knows had done extra, and it turns out that dark matter, one version of it, could be very, very slightly charged, and it could also be very slow moving. And he said, when it encounters an electrical object, it could stick to it like cling film. And of course, it could be much more complex than that. It's, you know, we don't know much more than that. But it turns out that in John Hagelin's model, he's saying this could be what our physical mind, our physical body is interacting with. There could be a second body made of subtle matter, not dark matter, but subtle matter that interacts with this body, and which you can train, right? And this then would become the basis for all of yogic science, and it would be the basis of what floats off when the physical body dies, because the electrical activity in the physical body dies, and then this subtle body can float off. And it could be also, and it floats off in a near-death experience and so on. And it interacts with some kind of subtler world, and the electrical energy in it, and if that the subtle light in it, might all be completely coherent. It might be quantum, it might be like laser light, but at a very low level. So there's just the fringes of a possible model emerging in physics that would explain psychic experiences, the mind being separate. In Ayurveda, they actually talk of 3 levels of the body. In fact, 6. You've got a body which they call Annamaya dosha. Anna, food. Maya, illusory. Dosha, sheath. The illusory sheath made of food. And then there's Prana Maya dosha, the illusory sheath made of energy. And then you have Mano Maya dosha, a sheath made of mind, and Buddhi Maya dosha, a sheath made of intellect. And beneath that is a body of bliss, and then universal consciousness. So you have a causal layer, you have a subtle layer, which is mind and intellect, and then you have our physical body and its energy that we breathe. And that's the model of the body in Ayurveda, the Indian holistic health system. And you nourish the subtle body just as much as you nourish the physical body. So like, you know, after a couple of thousand years of the Western religions and the emergence of science, there seems to be some potential for a great synthesis to emerge. And I've been playing with this and wanting to discuss it with other people. And Patsy's, you know, heartfelt cry for topics made me feel bold enough to say, well, look, let's try this out on my discussion group friends and see how it lands. I'm simply interested to look, thank you for not leaving. Thank you for staying with it. And I'm interested to know how this lands, because I have a feeling that this kind of fusion of science and mysticism is going to become clearer and clearer and more useful in the world as time goes by, and perhaps gives us a chance to shift from a materialist society, which has become toxic in the last decades. It's no longer nourishes humanity, in my feeling. So I would love to see Quakers who and I see Quakers as being found on this kind of mystical vision of George Fox, who had deep insights into this. And I think there's a chance to, you know, reclaim this, and for Quakers to really, you know, stand tall in the world and help bring us together into a more caring society. ... Any thoughts? Any questions? What emerges? You may unmute yourselves and jump in.
Very, very exciting, I think. Very, very exciting idea. Quite a few physicists looking into this at the moment.
Yeah, and I'm one in particular, and I'll put a link to him, is this guy, I think Donald Hoffman. You know, and he's sort of, you know, his topic is, look, how real is reality? And there's some good interviews with him. I'll point to an interview where he explains, you know, the cracks. And he was privileged to be in a group of scientists who met in secret with Francis Crick, who was one of the discoverers of the structure of DNA. And he said the next big question is consciousness. And, you know, didn't feel comfortable discussing it in public. And he brought together a group of scientists who met regularly to discuss what, and Hoffman describes this. And there's one model that I got from a researcher at Stanford, a guy called Dimitri Kanellakos, which hints at where humans can interact with this. And in Dimitri's model, you can think of your mind as being aware or not aware, right? Where you know, but you can also think of it as thinking and not thinking, right? So right now we're aware and thinking. When you're in deep sleep, you're not aware and you're not thinking. When you're dreaming, you're thinking and you're only a bit aware, or maybe you're not aware at all. You know, you can detect people dreaming and they don't remember it. But if you wake them up in the middle of it, oh yeah, I was dreaming. but it leaves a gap, which is aware and not thinking. And this is what meditation practices are based on. You sit down, you don't try and fall asleep. You start to stay awake, but you practice some form of thinking, which might include the thinking becoming more and more subtle. So in the TM that I practice, you're thinking a thought called a mantra, but the mantra settles the thinking in the mind. So you're aware of this thought as it becomes quieter and quieter. And there's a point where you're just aware. And unlike René, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And if you're meditating, you're going, well, I'm not thinking, and I still am. So there are states of awareness that transcend thinking. That's where the name transcendental meditation comes from. So transcend thinking. So that's the starting point for tapping into this ocean of consciousness, leaving behind the sensory thinking world and coming down to experience a field of pure awareness that doesn't feel like it has an edge to it. It doesn't feel like it ends at my body. You're not feeling your body. You're just feeling pure awareness in meditation on a good day. Right.
David, have you come across this book?
I have not. Mark O'Connell, To Be a Machine. Adventures Among Cyber. Yeah, okay. So, and what's the last line? Hold it up a bit more. The modest problem of death. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There are loads and loads of people looking into this. I've got that, you may not have come across this one. This is from Sadhguru, an Indian mystic, Death, an Inside Story, right? So he's writing, it's a wonderful book, and I haven't read it all. So, the topic of death and living is being really...
What Mark Connell is trying to say is that he and a few others see it as to be, the silly side of transhumanists, that we will somehow connect to computers to become living forever because you're in the computer system type of thing, which I think is very, very silly. But it's still, there is a lot of people who have these views.
Well, my view of a lot of what we've done with technology, every time we develop a better technology, we start to think of ourselves in terms of that. Like, the brain is a clock. Once we had good watchmakers, the brain turned into a clock and so on. And now it's the brain's turning into computer because we've made computers. But these are like a scaffolding where we're actually learning more and more about the deeper levels of mind and consciousness. And I have no wish to live in Mark Zuckerberg's world of meta, but I'm really quite interested to think of life as something that goes on, that persists from one life to another, and where the Indians are saying, yeah, that's all very well, but that's what happens if you don't do this thing consciously and practice it properly. If you're a yogi, then what you are doing is hacking consciousness. If I've got this subtler mind, can I make this level of my mind more coherent and strengthen this subtler level of my mind? And of course, that's what happens in meditation, is mental activity becomes more coherent, and so it will attract more of this subtle matter or energy or whatever. Maybe.
Maybe. I think, I've done TM since the 1970s. I was very ill, and when I got better, I was living in London, I tried everything. And TM, actually, meditating for 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the afternoon really worked for me and gave my life a coherence. But I wouldn't say I'm a follower of whoever invented that. I'm a follower of no one. I think my view with, now I've got grandchildren, and quite soon I think, you know, one of them might have a child, and I will have, you know, a progression from me, you know, to my daughters, to my grandchildren, and maybe the next generation. And it seems to me that to me is what matters. I lived for quite a few years in New York, and I got very interested in the belief systems of some Native Americans. I mean, it was virtually destroyed by the white people who first came to the United States. But I think there was quite a movement in the 60s when I lived there to actually, some of the Native Americans looked back into their culture and their memory and were resurrecting it. And that was very powerful. Sort of I've got lots of books, some picture books, I think, but probably one of my granddaughters got interested, so they've probably moved on. So I think it is a journey. It's not a I'm a Christian. There was quite a movement at the time, someone saying you cannot talk about a Muslim child, a Hindi child, a Christian child. Your religion is something that you think you come to, it's a belief system which it's not possible for you to develop that until you have a mature mind. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, lovely. Yes, there's so much wisdom coming out at the moment from indigenous cultures about living more in tune with the planet, about where we come from. Many different models of our origins, which is kind of up for grabs as well. Different interpretations of our own creation myth in the Bible as well. Yeah, Graham.
Very much, David, for a very interesting talk.
Can't quite hear you. Can you shout, or I'm not sure why that.
Try to get a bit closer to the.
That's good. Got you now.
You mentioned earlier on that some doctors are becoming interested in this. I hope Hattie accesses the YouTube recording of your talk and discussion. We had an attender at Bedminster some years ago who was a doctor and did a lot of work on the records of near-death experiences held by Lampeter University and gathered by a Scotsman whose name I forget. So there's a lot of material about. I'm interested in visions of people who have died, usually called ghosts, and have had one or two contacts who seem to me to be completely sincere in the record they give of their experiences. And that has led me to be interested both in the subject you've tackled and in the issue of transmission. I'd like to know what you think about visions or ghosts, and also telepathy, which raises to some extent the same issue of transmission.
Well, yeah, and this is why I think that's why I think of this death and dying stuff as a little bit skimming the ocean, because I think there's a lot more in the depths of the ocean. Certainly, if I can float off in some kind of subtle body when I die, there's every likelihood that there are humans who are sensitive people who are able to detect that one way or another and interact with it. And there's another topic called remote viewing, which is based, the best researcher I know is a man called Stefan Schwartz on this. And he talks about non-local consciousness, because what he's saying is you're closing your eyes and you're projecting your mind and trying to visualize something at a distance, and a distance could be in physical or in time, and see what's going on there. And he calls this an experience of non-local consciousness. And what the body has the effect of doing is of really localizing consciousness, holding it to a space. And it's sort of like, it maybe doesn't want to be there all the time. And that's why it's able to float off in dreams, because you also have people having experiences of astral traveling in dreams. They're not confined to their body when they're dreaming, and they quite clearly go to different places. So all of this stuff, there's the best guy on this, the one who run the Robert Bigelow's competition. Oh goodness, I'll put a link to him. Is a man who is the only so far person to have got a doctoral degree in parapsychology, and he got it from the only university in the world you would imagine granting such a degree, which was the University of California at Berkeley. And yeah, there are people who are studying this quite intently, Graham, from all kinds of different aspects. And at the moment it's sort of like picking at it's like the blind man describing an elephant, that you're getting different descriptions from different people that don't fit together, but gradually a picture emerges, and it's most coherent in the wisdom traditions and the native traditions, where they don't question these things. Somebody would see an animal and say, oh, that's a spirit animal, not a real animal, or whatever. Gosh.
There are now computers who can pick up the signals from the brain, kind of what we are thinking about, and can produce it on the screen for people who are sometimes need that because they're not verbal in any other way. And so there is no reason, I don't think, why with the right mindset people could pick that up as well. Yep. It's very much part of that, because we know so little about the brain at the moment that that is something which I think could be added into the mix.
Well, and I mean, the strangest experiments indicate that it's not limited to humans. There's one experiment where chicks were put in a cage, and there are two cages, and the adjacent cage is a little robot that moves around at random, right? But it's got a little brain choosing its random numbers, and that digital brain is electronic. And what they find is, and if they dress that little robot up a little bit to look like a chicken, then the chickens might think of it as their mother. And what they find is that over time, it stops moving randomly around the cage and is more likely to come closer to the little chicks. So somehow they're influencing it so their mother comes closer to them. Now, how can that even possibly happen? It can only, well, consciousness and the brain of the chicks is an electrical activity, and somehow it's influencing a very different electronic nervous system, but causing it to behave non-randomly in a way that they would want. They want their mummy to be closer to them. And I find, that's weird and intriguing and interesting and insightful at the same time. And so there's one more piece, and this will be for another time, obviously. In the yogic system, there are descriptions of higher states of consciousness in which one perceives these levels, right? So the subtle matter stops being something conjectural and becomes something that you perceive and interact with, and eventually the possibility is to bring your consciousness into complete attunement with the causal level. At which point you still got a body until you haven't, but your identity is with this universal field. And the experience then, it's interesting, a lot of things that one reads in the Bible make more sense. When Jesus says, I and the Father am one, then in the Indian system, you'd say, oh, yeah, this is an experience of what Indians call unity consciousness, where he experiences himself as being united with the field that all of this surface level creation is coming from. So, there's a harmonizing between different religions as we start to see beyond the forms and words of a religion and into the deeper unifying truths and realities. So hacking consciousness and getting to higher states of consciousness is kind of another interesting topic. I didn't think I'd be able to get to it today, but I'd love to do one on that, but I want to just mention it as something worthy of study. It's as if you bought a car and you were running around in 4 gears, and then you discovered that there was another gearbox and you could shift into a higher range altogether. And that's what yogis, that's what a yogi is all about. One who is in a state of yoga, where yoga means union with the source. And what's another word for union with the source? Re ligare, to tie back to the source. The root of the word religion is about not what God is, but the root is from the technologies for tying oneself back to uniting with the source. Ray, we've gone on over an hour. It's your job to stop me from.
Well, sweet of you. But is there any other questions or comments to David? Okay, then, friends. Then we shall end on this note, and we will no doubt see each other next week.
Sure. Yeah.
And of course, me being a very shallow person has forgotten what's going to happen next week. Patsy.
Oh, it's Graham is going to give us a talk. Graham, I'm never sure how. I do apologise. I cannot remember how to pronounce the word REINGE. If you would be kind enough to elaborate, please.
Is the correct spelling is pronounced range, as with.
I can't hear. Could people hear that?
No, I couldn't hear it. Graham, I hope we're going to have you with a good volume next week. I'm not sure. We may need to practice with you somehow.
Well, I've got this headset.
You're almost inaudible.
I've got a headset with a microphone, which I think is better, but I took it off because Valerie wanted to hear the last bit of David's talk.
Oh, right. Okay.
So at the moment, I've not got it on. I'm trying to use the laptop microphone, which is obviously inadequate.
Yeah.
But next week, I shall be speaking, and if she wants to hear what I have to say, she will be able to directly from my mouth.
Great.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being a lovely audience.
Thank you, friends.
Lovely participants.
See you next week.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.